Picture a modern supply chain network for a second, right? Like a trusted third-party vendor's software patch gets
Oh,
compromised.
the classic nightmare scenario.
Exactly. And it gets pushed out to, I don't know, 10,000 companies simultaneously. Within hours, hospital networks begin locking up, international shipping ports freeze, and the global economy it hemorrhages billions of dollars.
Yeah, and that stereotypical hacker in a dark hoodie, typing furiously in some isolated basement, that is a ghost of the past.
It really is. Today, that hacker is a cog in a highly organized, heavily funded global syndicate. And to fight back against that, our entire concept of defense has to evolve. So welcome, everyone, to the WeCyberYou Unlocked podcast.
Glad to be here for this one.
You are joining us for a critical deep dive into the hidden architecture of global digital defense. Today, our mission is to really understand how modern cybersecurity has completely fundamentally shifted.
Right, from simply locking the doors of a single business to actively defending an entire interconnected global neighborhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how we fight back, we are looking at a very specific set of source materials today, which is the ISO 27032 guideline.
Which is a pretty profound paradigm shift. And honestly, it's an overdue one.
Yeah. Why do you say overdue?
Well, the old ways of securing systems they simply fail against modern adversarial tactics. Traditional information security focused really intensely on the isolated perimeter. The firewall, the internal servers, the company-owned endpoints.
Right, but that localized approach is mathematically outgunned now.
Spot on. When you're trying to protect against automated, distributed threats that just effortlessly cross organizational and national boundaries in fractions of a second, a moat around a castle doesn't work anymore.
The physical boundaries have totally evaporated. A decade ago, if you secured your internal network bubble, you were generally safe. But for you listening right now, think about your own environment.
Yeah, think about what you actually connect to every day.
Exactly. Your corporate laptop syncs with a cloud provider, which integrates with a payment gateway, which relies on global telecommunications infrastructure. You aren't operating in a castle anymore.
No, you're really not. Today, the environment relies on distributed cloud architectures, third-party microservices, and constant API integrations.
It's just people, systems, and autonomous services interacting in real time, right?
Yeah.
Constantly sharing data across the open internet. The blast radius of a single compromise has expanded exponentially.
I think the best way to visualize this shift is to move away from that old moat analogy and think about a biological immune system.
Oh, I like that. Like when a pathogen attacks a single cell in the human body.
Yeah, exactly. That cell doesn't just fight a localized solitary battle.
Yeah.
It analyzes the virus, generates a chemical signature, and broadcasts that genetic blueprint to the rest of the body.
Right, so T cells and antibodies everywhere instantly update their defenses. So ISO 27032 is essentially the architectural blueprint for building that exact systemic immune response, but for the digital world.
What's fascinating here is how the standard technically defines what we are securing within that organism, because it moves far beyond just deploying stronger encryption or, endpoint detection.
Yeah, the guideline actually breaks down the protection of cyberspace into 4 interconnected pillars, right? People, information, infrastructure, and applications.
Right. And that first pillar always stands out to me. Because information, infrastructure, and applications, those are the standard technical domains you totally expect in an ISO document.
But placing people as the foundational pillar feels like a highly intentional shift in threat modeling.
It is highly intentional. Because, honestly, humans are the most complex, unpredictable attack surface in the entire ecosystem.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, you can have a perfect zero-trust architecture, but if an employee is manipulated through highly targeted social engineering to just hand over an authentication token...
Then the technical controls are bypassed entirely. It doesn't even matter how good your firewall is.
Right. The guideline insists that securing the digital world requires protecting and educating the humans operating within it.
The core objective from the sources is to really build a coordinated, intelligence-driven approach to cyber risk. The underlying mathematical reality is that cyber risk impacts ecosystems, not individual nodes.
Give me an example of that ecosystem impact.
Well, if a major logistics provider goes down to a ransomware attack, it doesn't just hurt them. It disrupts the global supply chain, halts manufacturing, and impacts consumer markets worldwide.
So because the blast radius is global, a solitary defense strategy is effectively doomed. Which brings us to the mechanics of how ISO 27032 actually suggests we fight back.
Right. If the entire digital economy is interconnected, the only logical countermeasure is to build a defender's alliance.
A Defenders Alliance.
Hmm.
The guideline heavily promotes active collaboration between governments, private sector organizations, law enforcement, and industry groups.
It is the only viable path forward, really. We have to move from isolated silos to an active, real-time cooperative defense network.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is where I have to push back hard on the practicality of this framework.
Let's hear it.
Because while an immune system naturally shares information, multinational corporations absolutely do not. The guideline mandates collaboration, but let's look at the corporate reality for a second.
Okay, fair point.
Yeah.
Corporate secrecy is a massive barrier.
Right. If I am the CISO of a Fortune 500 company and we discover an advanced persistent threat, an APT, just lurking in our cloud environment, my general counsel is going to lock that information down immediately.
Oh, 100%. They don't want anyone to know.
Exactly. Admitting vulnerability invites SEC investigations, massive regulatory fines, class action lawsuits, and absolute public relations nightmares. The corporate instinct is zero-sum survival.
Yep, it's every company for themselves.
So how do you convince fierce competitors to actively share their most sensitive, potentially damaging vulnerabilities with each other?
That corporate friction is arguably the single greatest hurdle in modern cybersecurity governance. It is a highly pragmatic skepticism you're bringing up. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at how our adversaries actually operate.
Right, because the attackers aren't dealing with corporate red tape.
Exactly. Threat actors are not hindered by non-disclosure agreements or SEC disclosure rules. They are highly organized syndicates. They share zero-day exploits on dark web forums. They sell initial access to each other, and they operate in this borderless, collaborative way.
So if the attackers are functioning as a unified global network and defenders remain fractured by corporate secrecy, the defenders are just going to lose every single time.
Every single time. And this is exactly why ISO 27032 pushes so heavily for the operationalization of cyber threat intelligence, or CTI.
Let's drill down into the mechanics of that CTI sharing, because we aren't talking about companies calling each other up on the phone and confessing their failures.
No, definitely not.
So what does this intelligence exchange actually look like at a technical level? How does a framework like this circumvent those massive legal hurdles to make sharing even viable?
It relies heavily on anonymized, standardized data exchanges. We're talking about frameworks like STIX, which is the Structured Threat Information Expression, and TechAtS2, the protocol used to route that information.
So it's automated and standardized?
Yes. When a major tech firm identifies a novel attack pattern, say a new command and control server IP, or a specific behavioral anomaly in how malware injects itself into memory, they don't share their own internal compromised data.
Right, they aren't sending over their own user logs or proprietary code.
Exactly. They extract the technical indicator of compromise, the IOC. They strip away their own corporate attribution, and they push that pure threat data to an IS, an Information Sharing and Analysis Center.
I see. So they are sharing the weapon's signature, not the victim's identity.
Spot on. This allows other organizations within the sector to ingest that data automatically. They update their firewalls, their intrusion prevention systems, and their endpoint detection platforms before the attacker ever pivots to them.
Wow. So ISO 27032 is really about establishing the trust protocols and governance rules, like the traffic light protocol, so organizations know exactly what data can be shared, with whom, and how quickly.
You basically move the industry mindset from we survive the attack to we neutralize the attacker's methodology so they cannot leverage it against anyone else.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, and the businesses you interact with every day? Because now that we understand the mechanism of how this Defenders Alliance communicates, let's ground this in the reality of the open internet.
Good idea. Let's look at the actual threats.
Yeah, what are the specific modern threats this framework is designed to neutralize?
The sources outline a deeply sophisticated threat landscape. We're dealing with those advanced persistent threats we mentioned, often backed by nation-states, aiming to establish long-term footholds in critical infrastructure.
Like power grids and financial clearinghouses.
Exactly. We are also tracking double extortion ransomware campaigns that paralyze entire city governments. And increasingly, we are facing AI-driven polymorphic threats.
The AI aspect is terrifying. It completely changes the timeline of defense. Generative AI can rewrite malicious code on the fly, altering its signature with every execution so that traditional static antivirus filters just never recognize it.
It never gets tired, and it operates at a scale human IT teams simply cannot match.
That is the crux of the problem, isn't it? When threats are polymorphic and dynamic, static defense is completely useless.
It is. behavioral analysis, and rapid intelligence sharing become your only lifelines. Let's walk through a realistic operational scenario from the text to show how this works.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine an attacker targeting a software vendor that supplies inventory management tools to the retail sector. They launch a highly sophisticated AI-crafted spear phishing campaign combined with a zero-day exploit to bypass the vendor's initial perimeter.
Right, so in a pre-ISO 27032 world, that vendor's IT team spots the anomaly, scrambles to isolate the affected server, patches the vulnerability silently, and just hopes the attacker didn't exfiltrate customer data.
Yeah, they contain it internally and keep their mouths shut.
But meanwhile, the attacker simply takes that exact same zero-day exploit and points it at the vendor's competitors one by one.
Exactly. But under the ISO 27032 framework, it is an entirely different operational playbook. The initial target doesn't just quietly patch the hole. They recognize this as a systemic threat.
Right, so they immediately extract the malware's hashes, the malicious domains, and the attacker's lateral movement techniques.
And they format this intelligence and push it through their industry sharing channels. Within minutes, retail companies globally ingest those indicators. The broader ecosystem black holes the malicious IPs and updates their detection logic.
So by the time the attacker attempts to pivot to their second target, the entire global neighborhood has already changed the locks.
Exactly. It shifts the cost of the attack back onto the adversary. If an attacker spends millions developing a zero-day exploit, and they only get to use it once before the entire global immune system neutralizes it, their return on investment plummets.
And the sources emphasize that this systemic defense has a profound impact on consumer protection and the digital economy as well.
Undoubtedly. The guideline places massive focus on securing e-commerce, digital identities, and online banking. Digital economies run entirely on the currency of trust.
Oh, absolutely. If you, as a consumer, cannot trust that your banking API is secure or that your digital identity is protected when you authorize a transaction, the economic engine just seizes up entirely.
ISO 27032 is designed to safeguard that foundational trust by ensuring businesses aren't just looking inward, but are actively defending the digital commons we all rely on.
Okay, the strategic vision is incredibly compelling. But let's put ourselves in the shoes of an IT director or a compliance officer who is listening right now.
Oh, they must be sweating right now.
Seriously. They already have mountain-high stacks of regulations, data privacy laws, and compliance audits to navigate. Integrating into a global intelligence sharing alliance sounds like a complete logistical nightmare.
It does sound overwhelming at first glance.
So how does a business actually operationalize this without tearing down the compliance frameworks they already have? Let's look at where 27032 sits within the broader ISO 27000 family.
That is vital context because ISO 27032 does not exist in a vacuum. The ISO 27000 series is a comprehensive ecosystem of standards, and understanding the interplay is critical for any security professional.
Let me try to frame this with an architectural analogy.
Go for it.
If ISO 27001 is the structural blueprint and the overarching governance of your facility, the information security management system that dictates how you manage risk.
Right.
And ISO 27002 provides the specific technical controls like the biometrics, the reinforced doors, and the server access logs.
Well, then ISO 27032 acts as the external nervous system. It dictates how your heavily secured facility communicates with the broader city infrastructure to share threat telemetry and keep the whole grid safe.
This raises an important question regarding compliance and auditing, though. With a framework like 27001, an organization can bring in a third-party auditor, prove their internal controls meet the strict requirements, and achieve formal certification.
Yeah, you get a certificate to show your board of directors and your clients.
But the sources are highly explicit about a major caveat regarding 27032. It provides guidance, not requirements. It is fundamentally non-certifiable.
Which feels counterintuitive in the compliance world, right?
It really does. Why wouldn't the ISO body want to certify companies for participating in this global defenders alliance? Why wouldn't an organization want that plaque on their wall?
Because you cannot quantify active real-time collaboration in a static annual audit. The cyber threat landscape is far too fluid.
Ah, I see. You can audit whether a server has a specific encryption protocol installed, but you can't really audit human collaboration.
Exactly. You cannot create a rigid pass-or-fail checklist for how effectively an organization synthesizes and shares behavioral threat intelligence during an active multinational cyber incident.
Because every incident is unique.
And furthermore, intelligence sharing relies heavily on maturity. If you mandate it as a strict requirement, companies will just do the bare minimum. They'll just start sharing useless, low-level spam data just to check a compliance box.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. A checklist mentality actually kills genuine collaboration.
Totally. By keeping it as strategic guidance, it forces mature organizations to think critically about their ongoing role in the digital environment, rather than just optimizing for an auditor's score.
And that is why the text dictates that ISO 27032 must be built on top of the other standards. You cannot effectively share external threat intelligence if your own internal log management is a complete disaster.
You build the robust internal security posture using 27001 and 27002, ensuring your own house is in order. Only then do you utilize 27032 to look outward, process external threat telemetry, and act as a reliable node in the global defense network.
You have to secure the perimeter before you can defend the neighborhood. It is a fascinating evolution in how we conceptualize security.
It really is.
So, to synthesize everything we have explored today for everyone listening, the core realization here is that ISO 27032 demands a radical shift in perspective. It pulls security out of the server room and into the global ecosystem.
And it mathematically proves that against distributed, automated syndicate-level threats, no single entity can survive in isolation.
We have officially moved past the era of the lone defender. We exist in a shared digital metropolis, and the only sustainable way to protect our data, our infrastructure, and our digital economy is through proactive intelligence sharing and relentless global cooperation.
It is an ambitious and deeply necessary framework. However, it leaves us with a rather chilling reality to consider.
Oh.
Well, if the entire future of global cybersecurity relies on absolute, frictionless cooperation and real-time intelligence sharing across private sectors, governments, and international borders.
Which is a huge if.
Right. What happens to our digital safety when geopolitical tensions make international trust impossible? Can we truly protect a global, borderless digital ecosystem when the nation-states and actors within it are actively fracturing?
Wow. That is an incredibly heavy systemic vulnerability to leave hanging in the air. As the internet potentially splinters into isolated regional factions, the concept of a unified global defense might be our biggest challenge yet.
It's definitely something to think about.
That is definitely something for you to ponder as you look at the devices, cloud services, and the interconnected networks you rely on every single day. A huge thank you to everyone for tuning in and navigating this complex landscape with us.
Thanks for having me.
Remember, you have been listening to the WeCyberYou Unlocked podcast. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the mechanisms protecting our digital world, please take a second right now to follow the channel on your podcast app.
Stay vigilant out there and keep analyzing the systems around you.
Always. And if you are looking for even more technical content, deeper architectural insights, and future deep dives just like this one, I highly encourage you to visit WeCyberYou.com. We have an incredible amount of material there to explore together. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay secure out there in cyberspace.